the great thing about TEFL is that if you get into it and you find that you love it, there is avenues for it to become a career. And so a lot of those people that I met in the early days are just like me now, and they have progressed into management roles and they've developed other skills alongside it that put them into the content creation, and they're creating teaching programs, even though they don't have a teaching degree. So it's definitely a viable career more than, I mean, of course it is for some people. It's almost like an adult gap year to go away and experience life somewhere else. But it can be a career if you want it to be.
Okay, hi. You're listening to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast by the TEFL org. My name's Ian Davidson, and in this podcast series, we're going to be talking to people who've taught English as a foreign language, find out where it's taken them and what they've learned from it. So, whether you're an aspiring TEFL teacher, you're studying a TEFL course, or you're interested in teaching English more generally, this is hopefully the podcast for you. We'll be covering a range of topics each week, from travel and accommodation to the nitty-gritty of teaching, all while taking a look at try that again. We'll be covering a range of topics each week, from travel and accommodation to the nitty-gritty of teaching, all while taking a look at global teaching and the quirks of TEFL life. I'm delighted to say I'm joined today by Frances Fraser-Reid, who says her final year of university was, in her own words, plagued with daydreams of travelling the world. Through evenings of procrastination, she discovered the world of ESL teaching and quickly felt it pull her in. After completing the TEFL org course, which is a unprompted plug for the TEFL org, and graduating from university, the experience was, as Frances puts it, I saw the abundance of jobs in Vietnam, did some investigating into the culture, and decided that it was the right move for me. I quickly secured a teaching position in the urban metropolis of Ho Chi Minh City and booked a flight. And another quote, the original plan was to work for 8 months, travel for 4 months, then come back to the UK, but those plans quickly went out the window. It's now been 6 years of living in Vietnam. Safe to say I love not just the work, but the country and the lifestyle. With TEFL Org as her foundation, she's been able to progress into many different roles during her teaching career. Starting in ESL, she's transitioned into content integrating learning, teaching science and maths, subjects she's passionate about, having studied biology at university. More than this, she says, TEFL has become a career, having been promoted into the management and content creation branches of companies that she's worked for. So, pretty wild and varied CV there so far. So, Frances, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, can't complain. It's a sunny day in Glasgow, which you don't get many of. But yeah, pretty good, pretty good.
I'm here.
Um, so you're another one of our guests who's got this really interesting kind of varied CV, and we'll get into more depth with that. But I wanted to ask you first. Um, Tell me about university. Where were you based, and where did those daydreams of travel come from? Did you travel a lot growing up, or was it sort of more aspirational? Kind of where did that all come from?
So I'm from Edinburgh.
Hmm.
So I studied in Stirling, which is kind of between Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Hmm.
And university itself was fine. It was more, I didn't really feel a big connection to the degree that I studied. And after doing some research, I realized I would have to go on and do a master's and do a PhD to be able to find the kind of work that I had originally set out to do with the degree. Um, and then during the summers of university, I would save up lots of money and I would do different trips. So I did a 3-month backpacking trip in Thailand, and that kind of like secured my love of Asia from the get go. So I
Hmm.
knew that I already had these visions of like, I want to be back there. I want to explore other countries and be able to like fully immerse myself in that part of the world. And that's where TEFL came into the picture for me. So it just kind of it sparked. Um, I had this desire to move, and it was the fuel that I needed to make it work.
Excellent. So actually, that ties in quite nicely to the next question, which, and just to let people behind the curtain, I don't tell people what questions they're going to receive when they come on this podcast. So if it all happens, it's all magical. But so you say you investigated the culture of Vietnam, and you decided it was for you, obviously. But was there anything particular about Vietnam that drew you in comparison to other countries? I mean, you mentioned Thailand there as well. Like, what was it about Vietnam where you thought, like, I could make this home?
Well, I had a few different countries that I was looking at. Another one was Mexico. Another one was South Korea. And I think for me, it was the cultural aspect of it. These are all countries with really rich culture and great food and like lots of diverse landscapes that you can explore. So for me, if I was wanting to base myself in somewhere like long term, it had to
Mhm.
be able to tick those boxes. It had to have an interesting culture I could learn about. It had to have great food, and it had to have lots of cool places that I could travel to on weekends or during vacation time. So that kind of put Vietnam onto like the scene. And then through doing some more research, I saw actually teaching is very big business in Vietnam now. There's a big drive to increase the English, especially among students. So there's a lot of jobs going, and those jobs can actually be quite lucrative. So I think that also was pretty important in my decision making on choosing to pick Vietnam in the end. And also, the weather played a big part for me
Yeah.
because I mean, you get it. We're in Scotland and the weather's not always great. And I'm definitely more of a summer person and I really I feed off of that warm climate. So that kind of threw South Korea out the window for me because I was reading a lot of stories of the harsh winters that they have. Um, and yeah, I just already had this love of Asia, which kind of drew me closer towards Vietnam than Mexico.
Mhm. That makes sense, and it's interesting that you mentioned those places because all three are sort of really emergent TEFL teaching locations. Especially Mexico. Like I feel like a lot of people don't really think about Latin America as a place to teach English, but it's really kind of growing. And obviously the country they ended up choosing Vietnam is, like you say, there's a lot of kind of impetus into teaching English, especially in kind of southern and southeastern Asia, as you'll know. And you mentioned there about making a living in Vietnam. So to the outsider, like what is the kind of a lot of people are talking about the expense of living, especially in the UK. What's it like in Vietnam in terms of what you're earning versus how much you would have to spend on a sort of monthly basis?
So for me, I ended up having quite a lot of disposable income because the wages for foreigners teaching English are quite comparable to some jobs back at home. So they kind of range from about £1,500 anywhere up to £2,500 for an ESL teacher.
Right.
And then the cost of living is significantly lower. Um, there are things, as a foreigner, you do get different prices for stuff. But the longer you're in an area and the locals start to recognize you when you're going for food or you're going to buy things, you don't have to haggle or anything like that. They just recognize you and you do get the same prices for street food. Um, for apartments and things like that, I think on average, I would be spending about $500. So I think that's about £430 ish a month, but that's for like a one bedroom on my own. Sharing with friends, obviously, it can drop your costs lower, but you have to also note that the lifestyle that comes is just you get a lot more for your money.
Mhm.
So all the apartments I've lived in have had parking included. They've had gyms included. They've had swimming pools and outside like landscaped areas. The last one I was in had like a terrace where you could do yoga, or they had outdoor projectors that you could rent and have like a
Wow.
movie night
Okay.
with friends. It was amazing.
Hmm.
Um, so while it might not seem as cheap as some people expect, you do get a lot more for it. So that's one of the great advantages of living in Vietnam versus living in the UK is that your money can go a lot further for the quality of life that you're looking for.
You mentioned a few times there about having friends over there and sort of being able to share these experiences. Like, is there a sort of kind of active scene, if you like, of TEFL teachers and like-minded people? Is that hard to cultivate? Does it involve a lot of kind of like networking online, that kind of thing? Like, how does that come about? Is it quite organic?
For me, I struggled a little bit for the first few months because I was working at quite a small school. So there
Hmm.
wasn't that many other teachers that I could really try to bond with. Um, and then as the time went on and I would start to go to more events and go to more of there's like some social hubs in Ho Chi Minh City that are really popular among the foreigners that live there. So you go to an event there, you go to an outdoor cinema night, you go to a pop-up market, all these different kind of things. And there's a really strong community, especially in the neighborhood that I was living in.
Mm.
Um, there's also Facebook groups where you can find support and you can find other people who are new to the city to meet up and hang out. Um, so I would say after about 6 months, I started to form some like deep friendships, and it's a it's a little bit like university in a way, because you'll have maybe a couple of core friends, and then they'll introduce you to some people and they'll introduce you, and suddenly you can go on a night out and you'll be surrounded like everybody that you recognize and and it does start to become a lot more organic after the first couple of months. But I mean, it's the same as making new friends anywhere. There's a little bit of
Mhm.
effort has to go into it, especially when
Yeah.
you're an adult, and if you don't love partying or drinking, there's a little bit further effort there. Another thing is doing sports. There's a
Right.
lot of
Okay.
different sports groups there. Like there's Gaelic football, so all the Irish people, they all join the Gaelic football team. There's rugby teams, there's cricket. Um, I used to go to gym classes, so I would meet a lot of other foreigners because the classes were taught in English. They were targeted at foreigners. So I've made quite a few friends that way too, which is just it's a little bit different. I feel like I would go to a class back home and I would be too scared to talk to anybody, but you have to remember that everyone's in the same boat and you're all trying to like build a community out there.
As an aside, having been to gym classes myself, the idea of speaking to anyone after a gym class, like personally, is terrifying. Mainly
Yeah.
because I mean, it's not a sight anyone wants to see, really. But that's my own thing. I need to sort that. So, when you moved over to Vietnam, obviously it's a massive kind of culture shock. Having studied at Sterling, and no disrespect to Sterling, Sterling's a lovely place, but I can imagine like going from there to is it Ho Chi Minh or Ho Chi Minh? Am I
Ho Chi
pronouncing
Minh.
that?
Yeah.
Chi
Ho
Minh.
Chi Minh.
So yeah, going from there to Ho Chi Minh City, I'm just wondering, like, what surprised you most about the culture and the landscape? Because obviously you talked about having the kind of these sort of you had the ambition to move out to Vietnam. There was a lot of stuff that attracted you to it. But I was wondering if you could sort of expand on kind of the culture and lifestyle in Vietnam in general, and if anything if anything caught you by surprise. Sorry.
Um, I would say I had done quite a bit of research. I obviously hadn't been there, but I had a rough idea of what I would be stepping into. I knew it was going to be hot. It was going to be very busy. It's one of these almost like a mega city. I think it's 13 million people in the city that I live in. So I
Wow.
knew that it was going to be busy. Yeah. There's a statistic that there's like 8 million motorbikes in the city. So you know that you're going to be sort of a little bit on your toes with the traffic, shall we say. Um, and that's one thing that, like, I was prepared for that sort of stuff. Um, I wasn't prepared for like the diversity of food that I was going to be able to try. Because I mean, growing up in the UK, I'd only ever really heard of pho, which I always pronounce as po because that's the way our phonetics work. So
Yeah.
I got to learn all of this new different food. Um, One thing I really love about the lifestyle in Vietnam is that the locals spend a lot of time outside. So even in the city, like a lot of elderly people, they go to the park in the morning, they do Tai Chi, or they do exercise classes outside. You'll see people often have their front doors open and they kind
Right.
of like their life comes out onto the street and they're either selling stuff on the street, like they have fruit and vegetable stalls, or it's the mechanic and his house is in the back, but his front room is the mechanic.
Right.
Um, so that was something I wasn't really expecting, but it is really nice. It sort of gives you a little insight into the everyday life there, which is great.
Mhm. That's amazing. And as you say, being raised here, it's kind of difficult to imagine that because, even though there is a sense of community, it feels like when you come into your house or to your flat or something, close the door, kind of like the world's out
Yeah,
there, you know. Okay, cool.
definitely struggled with that being home. 'Cause I'm
Yes.
at home for a visit right now, so I'm very aware that, like, people kinda keep to themselves a lot here, whereas I'm used to people sort of waving at you or saying hi and just stopping to ask small questions and stuff like that,
Mhm.
which is quite a big difference from the UK and the sort of the mentality here is very much like you keep to yourself and privacy and everything. So,
So we'll probably go into sort of your academic background a wee bit more later on, but because that was particularly interesting to me. But I want to sort of fast forward to you're coming to the end of your degree. You're thinking, TEFL is the choice for you. You've obviously identified Vietnam as well as Mexico and South Korea as options to travel. How quick was the process of completing your TEFL certificate and then finding a job? Because the way you've described it to me makes it sound like it was all quite sort of whirlwind. I mean, would that be fair to say?
um, I would say it was all since I started my final year of university, it was always there that I had already decided going into
Mhm.
university and for my last year that this is what I was going to do when I graduated. So it wasn't it was kind of a whirlwind, but it wasn't really. It was
Uh-huh.
premeditated.
Sure.
So I think around the Christmas time, I signed up for my TEFL course, and I actually took a lot longer than I thought to complete it because I hadn't really figured out the deadline. And I forgot about the deadline. So I ended up extending it. So I think I'd finished it in the spring.
Mhm.
Um, and then obviously I had to wait and finish my degree, wait for graduation. And then around the time I was graduating, it would have been around June time. I was looking on job websites, I was on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and I sent off a few different applications, and then they all kind of came back to me, and we did some like Skype interviews. And then there was one that stood out to me. So I was like, yep, I'm going to do it. And they said, okay, let us know when you've booked your ticket. We'll be expecting you in like 3 weeks. And I was
Wow.
like, all right, let's do it. So it was a little bit fast. Like in the end, it was a bit fast, but there was a
Mhm.
build up towards it. Um, I'm definitely grateful that I had a bit of time between finishing my course and starting work to sort of plan everything through because there's a little bit of prep that goes into moving. So it
Oh, for
gave me
sure.
that
Yeah.
time.
You definitely need that buffer time. I mean, that's crucial. So what was the we deal with obviously on the TEFL org, we talk mainly about courses, we talk about the kind of things, the kind of opportunities that TEFL can open up. But we also talk about the visa process for different countries because is crucial. And obviously each country, even within like, continents like the European Union, like each country has its own quirks when
Mhm.
it comes to visas. So what was that like for getting into Vietnam? Was it, I mean, obviously, if there won't be much kind of comparison. But in your own experience, like what was that like? Was it tough, or was it made easy for you?
So one of the reasons I decided to find a job before I moved was that I had been aware that you can't work on a tourist visa. So I would have to come in on a business visa.
Mhm.
So that was one of the reasons that I started looking for jobs back home. And so once you secure the job, they can write you a sponsorship letter and then they get you the business visa so that when you land, you don't have to switch visas or anything.
Mhm.
Um, and once they have the business visa, they can process a work permit for you.
Right.
So that's like this is all the legal stuff handled by the company, but you provide your documents for them. So you would have to provide your TEFL certification, your university degree, and then once you land, you do a health check, which is
Right.
like a compulsory. It has to be done at one of their local hospitals. And once you've had all of them notarized, you just hand them over. They process your work permit for you. And if you are lucky and you have a long term contract, not every employer does this, but some will provide you with a residency card. So I've had temporary residency in Vietnam for, I would say, 5 out of the 6 years that I was there.
Mhm.
Some shorter term contracts, they don't give you the residence because it has to be a minimum of 1 year. Um, and that's great because it kind of supersedes your business visa and it allows you to travel in and out of the country as if you were a local. So
Right.
you don't
Okay.
then have to worry about visas or anything like that, which was really great. Um, but I'm not sure post COVID if that's as easy a process as it was before. Because I just left Vietnam at the start of summer to go traveling, and I know that right now they are only issuing 1 month tourist visas. So even if you came to the country right now to try and find a job, you would have to leave to come back in on a business visa. So I still think it's a good idea to find it in advance. Um, and then they can do multi-month business visas for you so that you kind of have a TRC without the residency card. Sorry, I'm using acronyms already. Um, so you would end up with the residency, but not with the physical card. It's just through the business visas.
Okay.
Um, so whenever I'm going back, I'm going to try and get a job before I land so that I have the business visa already sorted and I don't have to leave and come back.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like it would be like a tremendous hassle, but like, okay, cool. I think there's a lot of folk who will be reading, who who'll be listening to this and watching this and thinking like, oh, I'd love to do what Francis has done, but like, it sounds like there's so much paperwork and there's so much kind of technical stuff you have to do. But okay, I think it's going to be reassuring to a lot of people, knowing that if you are able to find work beforehand, there's a lot of help you can get. So I think that'll be really useful. So, because I'm a bit all over the place, we'll go back in time a wee bit. So, you studied biology, right?
Yep, I did biology.
hmm And you've taught maths and science in Vietnam as well. I think people might argue that it's quite an unorthodox route to teaching English as a foreign language, combining it with all those kind of things, um, let alone kind of doing that as a career. So, what would you say about the perception of TEFL as a pursuit for those who are purely interested in language, specifically English? A lot of people still think it's just for folk with certain degrees, like English degrees, who maybe want to move abroad for a couple of years. There's still kind of these myths and misconceptions. How would you answer that, kind of relating to kind of your own experience, and how did you get into teaching multiple subjects? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't realize that that's something you can do.
So I started out doing TEFL, so
Mhm.
teaching ESL. And I would say almost all the people I worked with did not have English or teaching degrees. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, you just had to have a degree.
Mhm.
And that's for the legal paperwork. So I was working with people with business degrees or engineering degrees, like all different sorts of backgrounds. And I think the great thing about TEFL is that if you get into it and you find that you love it, there
Mhm.
is avenues for it to become a career. And so a lot of those people that I met in the early days are just like me now, and they have progressed into management roles and they've developed other skills alongside it that put them into the content creation, and they're creating teaching programs, even though they don't have a teaching degree. Um, so it's definitely a viable career more than, I mean, of course it is for some people. It's almost like an adult gap year to go away and experience life somewhere else.
Mhm.
But it can be a career if you want it to be. Um, for me, I was actually reached out to on LinkedIn by a company that teaches the science and maths. So I'm teaching in a public school, and the kids are local Vietnamese kids. It's not a private institution or anything like that.
Mhm.
But they have a program where they want to teach science in English or maths in English. And it's kind of with the goal that when those kids come to university age, they already have all of the vocabulary and they're thinking about science and maths in English, to help them progress into these fields. I think it comes from historically Vietnamese students not being able to get into, say, American or British or Australian universities because they were kind of having to translate the science from Vietnamese back into English. So this is a way that the government thought we can tackle this from the root and teach science in English. Um, and for me, with the background in biology, I was like, this is great. It means I get to use what I already know and
Mhm.
I get to try teaching a different subject. And I actually found that I preferred teaching the science, because you're still teaching them vocabulary and you're teaching in an ESL style, but
Mhm.
it's it's a different angle on it, is a different um, sort of impact that you can have, which I really enjoyed.
And without making kind of generalizations, because it's kind of obviously it's quite a reductive way to look at things. But from your own experience, like how what's teaching in Vietnam like in terms of, we've had another guest on who teaches in Cambodia and says that students are really respectful and they love learning about different countries, and they really really embrace all the kind of the quirks of English and the rules, and there's just generally like a lot of respect for teachers there. What's it like in Vietnam? Is it quite similar? I mean, and if you
I
have
would
any
say
sort of
it's
funny anecdotes, that'd be good too.
I would say it's very similar
Mhm,
to Cambodia in that sense. The students are raised in a culture where teachers are highly respected. They have an International Teachers' Day, and the students will bring you gifts and
oh,
cards for appreciating just you being their teacher, which is something we don't have in the UK. So there is a lot of respect there. They are very curious and they'll ask lots of questions. And I found in my experience that the students work super hard. They really see the value in learning a foreign language. So for them, it offers more opportunities. As I mean, we're very blessed that we grew up in English speaking countries
mhm,
and we have a lot more access to the world. So they can see the benefits of learning a language that gets them sort of onto the international playing field in terms of jobs and studying and even like things like pop culture. You
mhm,
know, the amount of kids that I teach and they have got really great English because they love to listen to movies and music and YouTubers and whatever else. And
right.
it really opens up that world to them. So they try really hard. And it's actually been a great pleasure to teach, I would say 99.9% of my students. Of course, you get the occasional teenager who doesn't really want to try, but it's very few and far between, I would say.
Mhm. Ah, teenagers for you though.
Yeah.
You talked about those kind of pop culture references. We're going to go to a wee break in a second, but just finally, you talked about pop culture references, and there was a real thing in the '90s where people were learning to speak English from Friends, and so kind of you got this generation of people learning English who are also very sarcastic. So, like, what would be the modern equivalent? Like, what's the kind of maybe there isn't a main thing, but like, are there particular sort of
Mm.
cultural touchstones that people are kind of learning English from?
I'm not sure if there's something like Friends, like a TV show or a movie, but
Mhm,
I have seen a lot of kids are really interested in YouTubers. And it's something that maybe is a generational thing I'm not really familiar with,
mhm.
but they love to watch people gaming. So they'll
Okay.
be playing like Roblox on the screen and they'll be talking while they're doing it. And so, oh, there goes the dog. They'll be talking about what they're playing and how like talking to friends whilst they're playing, and so the students really love to get involved in that side of it. um, and then we're in 2022 and every kid seems to have a smartphone and TikTok, so I think also things like TikTok, they're really into learning through that too, which baffles me, but I've definitely seen a lot of kids make references to like TikTok trends and things like that, which is quite funny for me.
Yeah, I've got to imagine that sounds bizarre, but I mean, if it works, it works.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're just going to take a short break. My colleague Erin is going to tell you about some promotions we have going on at the TEFL org, and then we'll be right back with Francis Fraser-Reid.
Hi there. We hope you're enjoying listening to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast by the TEFL org. Hopefully you're feeling inspired by what you're hearing, and maybe you're wondering if you can teach English as a foreign language too. Well, the answer is yes. And as an exclusive reward for listening to this podcast, we're offering you 50% off TEFL courses, plus a free lesson plans pack to help you get started. Just use the code PODCAST at checkout. With that discount, you can get TEFL qualified with the world's most accredited TEFL course provider and learn how to teach from teachers. With dedicated tutor support, lifetime access to our TEFL Job Centre, and friendly advice from our team of experts, you could be teaching English abroad or online within just a few months. Signing up couldn't be simpler. Just visit www.tefl.org and add the code PODCAST at checkout to get your discount. That's www.tefl.org. Start your TEFL adventure today.
Excellent. And we're back with Francis Fraser-Reid. How's this going so far? I haven't been. One of my other guests was worried about me being intimidating and firing too many questions at them. Is this going okay?
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, your questions aren't too scary.
Okay, that's reassuring. Okay, so I will actually open this with a big scary question. So, what's the best advice you've received, either specifically about teaching, about going to Vietnam, or just in general?
Oh,
I know,
you're
right?
making me think. You should have prepared me with that question. Um,
That's the thing.
okay, biggest piece of advice I've received about teaching.
About whatever you like, but yeah, we'll go with teaching. Yeah.
With teaching, I find it really important to get feedback from other teachers and to have sort of roundtable discussions and share ideas that way so that you can sort of make things more engaging and troubleshoot things that your class are struggling to understand.
Mhm.
So, like leaning on the other teachers in your community. Um, Biggest piece of advice about moving? I don't think I was ever given any advice about moving. I was given a lot of, "Why are you doing that?" Um,
Right.
"Why do you want to live there?" And for me, I guess I would give the advice that you should just do it. If
Mhm.
you're thinking about it and it's something that keeps coming up in your thoughts, just do it because there's a reason that it's in your mind.
Mhm.
And everything falls into place when you get on the ground. So you might be worried, like, oh, but like, how do I set up a phone data plan? Or how do I find an apartment? Where am I going to make friends? All those things kind of fall into place. So my advice would be just go for it. Make sure you have a little float of savings so
Mhm.
that if you get there and you decide it's not for you, then you're not stuck in a tricky situation. Um, that would be my advice.
Sure. Um, that was actually turning the question around on me there, and because normally at the end I say, "So, what grand piece of advice would you give to people?" So, you've turned that big scary question to me, kind of scrambling for content now. So
Sorry.
that's masterful. No, that's absolutely no. I completely condone it. It's fine. Um, what's something about Vietnam that might surprise people who haven't been?
Mm.
Obviously, people who haven't been.
About the lifestyle or the culture or
Yeah,
just
I
in
mean,
general?
sorry, you gave me multiple choices. And I went, yeah. Um, something about the lifestyle.
Um, Lifestyle, what's something surprising? Um, there's like a few different things. I guess people are very resourceful.
Hmm.
So you'll find a lot of people being quite creative with things that they already have. Um, for example, I've seen fridges on the back of motorbikes because they didn't have a car to transport it in. Crazy things. So that's one quirk. Um, Another thing that kind of surprised me was the amount of superstitions that there are. But
Okay.
I guess that's tied into ancient history and stuff. So, for example, I cut my finger chopping
Hmm.
vegetables, and my friend said to me, "Oh my God, you can't eat beef. Don't eat beef until it's healed." And I'm going, "Huh? What are you talking about?" And she then replays this story that her mom told her as a kid that if she had beef, it was going to scar really badly. There's like some weird things like that. Um, and then, yeah, like some superstitions about ghosts and things like that that kind of like are very unusual for me to hear people that are my age talking about.
Hmm.
But I guess it's kind of deep rooted into the culture and traditions. Um,
Right.
yeah, I would say I don't know, it's hard for me to think of because I've been there for so long that these kind of things are just normal to me now.
I suppose. Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
yeah,
I didn't. I did not. I could not have told you that one about beef though. That's okay.
no.
Well, I suppose it's probably grounded in something, right? I mean, it's.
I mean, she then proceeded to show me parts on her hand where she had previously cut herself, and she's going, "Look, I don't have a scar. It's because I didn't eat beef. I did what my mom told me." And I'm like,
Right.
"Okay, it doesn't not founded in science, but okay, I will not eat beef."
Oh, hold on. I don't know if you heard that, but the cat's talking to me now. You okay, bud? You want to go away for a bit? No. Okay. Oh, well, I mean, he's going to make this harder to edit, but that's on him. Um, okay, so um, obviously, with the history of Vietnam, a lot of the Western perception of Vietnam comes from culture based around a really kind of bleak period of time.
Mhm.
But to flip that narrative, what culture from Vietnam would you say that Western audiences should pay attention to? What have you heard,
Um,
or listened to, or watched, or been at that you enjoyed that you think like this should have a worldwide audience?
I think, like you said, the history and the war that happened in Vietnam is really not so long ago.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm always kind of reminded that when I see elderly people in the street that they've lived through all of this. So I guess on the flip side is the resilience of the people, and you get this real sense of community and family and stuff, which I think for me it deserves more of a talking point than um, the horrors that went on. Um, Something that I think would be great to like shine a light on. Just their values are very traditional, and family comes first, and you're there for your friends and like this kind of thing. Are you
Hmm.
meaning more like event sort of stuff?
Well, whatever you like, really. I mean, anything that's. I mean, for example, when we spoke to Daniel from Cambodia, he was talking about a lot of music that he liked, and that sort of thing. So, if there's anything that's kind of caught your eye in Vietnam, like or your ear, I suppose, just
Hmm.
because I feel like obviously, kind of Western culture is very dominant, especially there was that period of time when so much of Western culture was like about what was happening in Vietnam, but like I feel there's probably a lot of really cool stuff there that's like that needs to be kind of unearthed for a sort of wider audience. I mean, would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I would say one of the coolest things for me, and I hate to use the word because it sounds a little bit corny, but the youth of Vietnam are very hipster.
Okay, cool.
So like the street style, the fashion is I I am not even if I could wear my coolest outfit, I wouldn't be in the playing field. Um they are super cool. They love like techno DJs, and there's a lot of local artists. They do these pop-up art installations, and I think a lot of that is fueled by the youth and their innovation. There's a lot of entrepreneurial businesses, cafes, and um, like arts venues, like music venues. I know DJs, I know fashion designers, like all different sorts of things.
Mhm,
Um, but it is very much like this trendy kind of bubble, especially in Ho Chi Minh. I would say less so in Hanoi,
mhm,
which is something I would say Hanoi is great for tourists, but they don't quite have the same like urban edge that the
mhm,
South has, especially in like our generation and younger. They're very, very um, quirky. Like their style is very cool. So that's something that I think nobody at home realizes is that they're going to be competing with big fashion very, very soon, because it's just it's insane the way that they dress. It's very cool.
that's
Um,
amazing.
yeah.
I hadn't.
So I wish I could get more involved in the quirky outfits, but it intimidates me a little bit too much. I feel like as my age is starting to show.
I mean, you're talking to someone with literally like a solid green jumper on, so like I
Yeah.
wouldn't know where to start with that. But power to them,
Yeah.
that's very cool. So obviously, kind of we focused a lot on Vietnam, but in a very very hypothetical, highfalutin sense, let's go with this. If you could teach anywhere in the world, visas,
Mhm.
money, all other factors not being an issue, a factor, where other than Vietnam would you go teach if you could do it just tomorrow?
Um, there's too many places in the world. Um, I think somewhere, I know it's very cliche, but somewhere like Bali,
Hmm.
where you have a great mixture of community, the beach, the mountains, having a bit more nature. I think again, my age is showing where I'm starting to get towards the point where I'm like, I just really want to be in nature all the time. Somewhere like that would be really cool. Mexico is still on my radar.
Sure.
I've not made it to South America yet, but whenever I get there, I want to size up some different countries, maybe places like Peru, Costa Rica. I'm not really sure what their current job market is like,
Mhm.
but they're all places that, to me, they have a similarly rich culture that would be really interesting and very different to Asian culture, which I'm pretty familiar with now. Um, so I think, yeah, like somewhere South America or like an island like Bali or the Philippines, you know?
Mhm.
Um, but I know the teaching thing's not really big in the Philippines because a lot of them speak English already. But um, yeah, I guess that would be my countries if I had to pick.
Cool. I mean, I would just quick addendum to that if it's okay, but the TEFL org has some excellent job resources for the Philippines, so don't be.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Thank you. I
I
only
do
know that because
apologize.
I wrote a thing. I don't know. No,
I
but
was about to say, can you tell I've not looked into it that much? I've been to the Philippines. I really liked it, but I didn't look into working there, so I do apologize.
no, not at all. Not at all. And just to round things off, let's imagine there's another Francis Fraser-Reid somewhere, but they're in university and they're thinking, oh, maybe I could move, maybe I could teach English abroad, maybe I could do all these things, but I'm just not sure about it. What would you say to that person?
I would tell them to follow their gut because I had such a pull towards it and it was something I couldn't shake. So I'm
Mhm.
very glad that I followed it. And I would say if you have that feeling, it's not going away for a reason. And I feel like you should kind of chase after it to see. It's one of those things like, are you going to regret more the choices that you didn't make than the choices that you did make? And I feel like you might get 10 years down the line and regret it a little bit more if you didn't go than if you did go. You can
Mhm.
always go and realize that it's not for you, which I highly doubt, by the way. I know so many people from different backgrounds that you wouldn't expect to love it as much as they do, but it's just it kind of charms you in. Um, so yeah, I would say follow your gut, and
Mhm.
if it feels right, try it out, and you can always change your plans. But also don't dismiss it as a viable career. I mean, I have been able to progress, I think, a lot faster in positions than I would have back at home working for companies here, especially working as a teacher here. I wouldn't have been able to get all the different experiences. Um, so, yeah, don't dismiss it and follow your gut.
Brilliant. Well, I mean that was heavy inspirational. I think I'm gonna get a plane ticket now. I should probably hand my notes in. No, I'm not going to hand my notes in. For clarity, Francis, it's been fantastic speaking to you. Best of luck with the next chapter, and thanks again for taking part.
No, thank you so much for chatting with me. I
Okay.
hope it's been useful.
Well, there'll be a comment section, so no, don't worry. I'm sure it has.
I'll just avoid it.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll leave the last word to Erin, who's going to tell you how to keep up to date with all things TEFL.org. Again, thanks to Francis, and thanks for listening.
You've been listening to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast by the TEFL org. However you found us, we hope you've subscribed to keep up to date with each episode. And please remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Acast, or wherever you found us. To keep up to date with the TEFL org, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search the TEFL org and you'll find us. And if you're interested in starting your TEFL journey, you can browse our courses and speak directly to an advisor by visiting www.tefl.org. That's www.tefl.org. See you next time.